Here in Hawaii, sustainability isn't just a goal, it's a necessity. As governor, I'm committed to accelerating our transition to 100% renewable energy. That's why partnerships with organizations like Ulupono Initiative are so important.
Our team at Ulupono Initiative is working to improve the lives of Hawaii's residents by addressing essential needs. There's a lot of good stuff that we can do that matters. We want to see the needle actually move. We want to see a change at a statewide level.
Ulupono Initiative has been a champion of sustainable Molokai. They're a good sounding board, they're a trusted partner, and we're able to make decisions together. We're continuously looking for trusted partners just like Ulupono Initiative who can be part of this greater movement to help us in this self-determining process of what renewable energy is going to look like on Molokai.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Michael Colón. I'm the Energy Sector Director at Ulupono Initiative. Thanks for joining us this morning. For those who don't know, Ulupono is an impact investment firm dedicated to advancing Hawaii forward in 4 main areas: advancing renewable energy, clean transportation, sustainable food agriculture, and fresh water. On transportation specifically, if you guys are wondering what those fortune cookies are in the back, please try one. The fortunes inside have a QR code to an interesting transportation study called the Super User Study. Really encourage you guys to take a look at that. Some really interesting takeaways. For example, 6% of all of our light-duty drivers, vehicle drivers, use around 25% of all the imported gasoline for the state. So today we are talking about nuclear, and I've got a very interesting panel collected here with me. The reason why we called it Why Not Nuclear is last year on stage, Governor Green gave an address, and he said, you know, cost is a concern, we need all options on the table. And he said, including LNG, lots of things that we hadn't been talking about in a while, except nuclear. And so that prompted me to think, well, why not nuclear? There's some pretty obvious reasons, which we'll get into, some concerns and some legal prohibitions. However, the technology has advanced a lot, and it's worth discussing and thinking about here in this conference. And, you know, Ulupono is a renewable energy focused organization, so we're not, you know, I'm not here to sell it, but wanted to make sure that we have these kind of conversations and think about and maybe walk away a little bit better informed. So with that, I would like to kind of just go down the panel and have my panelists introduce themselves and their connection to Hawaii.
All right. Morning, Michael. Morning, everyone. Thanks for allowing me to speak to you here today. My name is Marcus Nichol. I work for the Nuclear Energy Institute, which is an association of companies in the nuclear industry. Our organization represents them in terms of advocacy for uses of nuclear energy, as well as educational materials. My area of focus, new nuclear, includes the advanced reactor technologies that we'll talk about today. My connection with Hawaii is relatively new. This is only my second trip to Hawaii, but it is a beautiful place, and I really appreciate the land and the people and the culture that are here. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Madison Schroder. I'm the policy coordinator for Generation Atomic. We are a grassroots pro-nuclear organization with thousands of members worldwide. I'm the policy coordinator, which means that I deal with mostly state-level policy advancing nuclear power across the United States. I'm also a PhD candidate studying political science and democratic representativeness. So if you have any technical questions, you can refer them to the 2 gentlemen around me, but if you have any questions about policy, that's me. My connection to Maui, my grandmother was born here, and much of her family remains on the island. So I've been coming here since I was young, and I'm really grateful to be back and thankful for the extremely generous hospitality.
Yeah, aloha. My name is Jack Shriver, and I am a I'm currently employed with a company called Power Engineers. Many of you out there are clients and colleagues. So, I want to talk just briefly about Power Engineers. We're a design firm for primarily electrical infrastructure design, substations, power plants, et cetera, renewable power plants, et cetera. And we're recently acquired by WSP, which is a much larger, broader service engineering service company. So first, I'd like to say really mahalo to Michael and to the Ulupono Initiative and this conference for hosting this particular topic. I think it's something important to talk about, regardless of what the outcome may or may not be. I think it's important to consider all things on the table. So in terms of my background and connection to Hawaii, I was first stationed here in the Navy on a submarine, nuclear-powered submarine, back in 1997, and I've lived here pretty much continuously since then, with a couple of short breaks. And once I retired from the Navy in 2012, I went to work for Hawaiian Electric, and I was on what everybody here was probably recognized as the self-build team for Hawaiian Electric. So I've been a nuclear power plant operator, I've been a developer, I've been a utility employee, and now I am with an engineering firm that does electrical system design. So I know this is kind of trite, but I am literally a jack of all trades. And I just wanted to, just say one thing before we get started. I was reading the news this morning. There's so much news going on about nuclear. It's really difficult to keep up with in the world and in our country. Not so much here in Hawaii, but in the country. And so my parent company, WSP, it was just announced this morning, was selected to do the design for Canada's new national waste storage facility, underground waste storage facility, which I assume is going to be comparable to, Yucca Mountain. So I thought that was great news, and I appreciate that. I just wanted to ask, is there anybody here in the audience from Canada? No. So then I can say, I'm glad there's a little bit of a titter of laughter there. So I can say that, Canada is now moving forward with their national waste repository. So in the event that they became the 51st state, we would have our national nuclear waste repository as well. So,
Jack Shriver, everybody. Well, thank you, and I appreciate the introductions. So before we kind of get into the discussion, I had asked Jack to just kind of do a deep dive into whether it's pronounced nuclear or nuclear. So we're going to spend the next 10 minutes on that. Just kidding. We're going to do a brief deep dive into the technology itself. So why don't you take it away?
Yeah, thanks. I think Michael asked me to introduce, just talk at a very high level about what is nuclear power, right? So first of all, nuclear power is a natural process. It's happening all around us all the time in various forms. And so, and I'm going to just say something, not that I haven't already said something controversial, but I'm going to say something a little bit controversial so that, to kind of maybe crack open the mindset a little bit here and say that by my calculations, approximately 99.75% of our energy on this planet is a result of nuclear power. And you guys can think about that for a minute, and we'll come back to that. So nuclear power, there's three basic processes. There's fission, fusion, and decay. And primarily, when we talk about nuclear power, we're talking about fission. And fission is a process whereby the nucleus of an atom, normally uranium-235, which is an isotope of uranium, which is a very common element around the world, is impacted by a neutron in the nucleus of the uranium atom, and that atom splits into two or more new atoms, right? Those could be a variety of, those are called fission products, right? Those smaller atoms. And in that process, a tremendous amount of energy is also released, and also some additional neutrons. And those neutrons go on to impact other fissile material atoms, other uranium atoms primarily, and those then can fission. And so that chain reaction, that controlled chain reaction, results in the release of a lot of energy, a lot of heat. That heat is captured by a coolant, which traditionally is water, but there are other coolants available, just like there are other fuels besides uranium. And then that heat is transferred to a secondary system, generally, again, water, that boils, creates steam, goes through a turbine, turns a generator, generates electricity. There are alternative designs to that, many of which are in this advanced, these new advanced designs that are coming out. Sometimes the coolant is a gas, sometimes it's a molten salt, sometimes the fuel is not uranium, sometimes it's, you know, thorium, could be plutonium, could be recycled nuclear waste or other materials. But that's the primary way that nuclear power works. Fusion, which a lot of people are interested in, is, from a nuclear process, is kind of the reverse. It's basically you take two essentially hydrogen nuclei and you smash them together, and in a very high temperature and high pressure environment, and they fuse into what is essentially a helium atom, and in that process you also get a release of energy. Fusion is not, a lot of people are working on it, and there's been a lot of advances in research and development, but not, it's not by any means commercially ready, like fission is. So I guess that's really the kind of high level. I mean, did I miss anything in the process there? That's really basically the way it works.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we can dive deeper into some of the newer technologies a little bit later and kind of explore what that means. But Mark, I was hoping maybe you can kind of give us a better sense on how nuclear power is currently playing in the global energy landscape, how it's fitting in as a technology around the world.
Yeah, happy to do that. Going back to the beginning, commercial nuclear energy started really in the 1950s, and you might remember the Atoms for Peace initiative. That brought U.S. technology worldwide, and what's important to remember with that is that nuclear energy and the peaceful uses of nuclear energy were seen as a pathway toward more peace in the world, and it certainly contributed to that. And so through that, U.S. technology was primarily spread to other countries. Some of those, like Japan, South Korea, they used that technology, indigenized it, and built up their own designs based on that. And so nuclear energy spread through that. Now, Russia also had its own designs and was trying to pursue similar things. But fast forward, today nuclear energy is about 10% of the world's electricity. In the United States, it's about 20% of the electricity. It accounts for most of the carbon-free clean energy in the world. And so it is extremely important. Around the world, it also is used for non-electric uses, especially heat distribution as well as electricity. Now, looking over the course of time, nuclear has grown in the rest of the world, even though it has not grown that much in the United States or other actually industrialized nations, because they had hit really plateaus in electricity growth. And that's important to know, because one of the main drivers for nuclear energy in the United States, other OECD countries, is this new rapid growth in electricity demand from various reasons. But the rest of the world continued to increase its use of nuclear energy over the decades. So where we are today, around the world, there's over 400 reactors in operation. The United States has 94. We're the largest. We're the country with the largest number of nuclear reactors. China is just behind us as second. And when you look at the number of reactors being constructed, it's almost 60 around the world. Of those, the U.S. technology accounts for absolutely zero. And that's sobering to think about, because most of those designs that are being deployed around the world are Chinese or Russian, and they're utilizing their deployment of nuclear technologies to these other countries to gain certain geopolitical and diplomatic advantages. And the United States has realized this. Our government is doing a much better job these days at trying to promote U.S. technologies and support them for other countries to consider. And so that is improving. Now, going forward, the rest of the world is really leaning into deploying more nuclear energy. If we were here 5 years ago, we would be talking about Germany phasing out nuclear or other countries like that. I can tell you just this week, Germany has decided to pursue nuclear again. One of the last countries I thought we would see that. Other countries like Japan are coming back to nuclear energy and interested in deploying it. Just about every country in the world now is starting to think about how they can incorporate nuclear energy. And there are, I think, about 50 countries right now with commercial nuclear energy programs, and so we'll see many more of those as we go forward. And the reason that they're doing it is the same reason why we're considering nuclear in the United States, is we need it for electricity, clean, reliable, affordable, but also we know we need to decarbonize non-electric systems, which is very hard to do and often not talked about. But nuclear can do it.
Right, and we're seeing increased power demand, not only from electrification, but also data centers, AI, increasing power demand, so that's kind of a global concern. Shifting focus back to Hawaii, there is a kind of big legal elephant in the room. Jack, I was hoping maybe you could address kind of the constraints that we're currently under here in Hawaii.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I think so. There's a couple of hurdles, and I think maybe I don't know if you're going to talk about the constitutional constraints there. But as we've been talking about, and yesterday, came up, of course, the renewable goals and the net zero or negative carbon goals that the state has set. And as we all know, as it stands today, nuclear is not considered a renewable resource. But I thought it was interesting when I think back to the origins of our push for renewable energy in this state, and I think that Shelley brought this up yesterday. The initial push for renewables here was not just about the environmental impact. It was also about energy security for our state and reducing our reliance on external resources. And what are the resources that were immediately apparent here in Hawaii? Sun, wind, waves. So I think that was, a real element of that push for renewable energy, in addition to the environmental impact. So nuclear is not currently defined as a renewable energy resource, at least not here in Hawaii. On the other hand, we have goals for net zero carbon or negative carbon footprint, and nuclear could, as we can talk about more, is a prime candidate for that. And so the definition of what is a renewable and what is not renewable is. It differs from state to state and from person to person, and it's really a political decision as much as it is a technical decision. And I think that from the technical perspective, there is, and we could talk about different fuel sources and how they come to be, and different technologies and breeder reactors and recycling of used nuclear fuel. We could talk about several of those things, but the bottom line is a viable argument could be made, and has been made in other places, that nuclear power could be considered a renewable resource. So in order, again, back to your question, why not nuclear? That's one of the things that would need to be resolved either through policy change or through definition change in order to be able to employ nuclear energy in this state.
Thank you. Yeah, not only that, which is important, but we also have a constitutional prohibition. Article 11, Section 8 says no nuclear fission power plant shall be constructed or radioactive material disposed of in the state without prior approval by 2/3 vote in each house of the legislature. So kind of combined, I think nuclear is pretty boxed out in the state of Hawaii right now. So I think in addition to what we'll be talking about here, paradigm shift and conversations about the technology, some big legal hurdles for nuclear. Madison, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, not so specifically about Hawaii, but I do want to mention that just because the moratorium exists doesn't mean that it can't be reversed. That several states in the United States have had moratoriums, but have overturned them. Illinois, West Virginia, and Kentucky are a couple of the examples where the legislature has reconsidered their moratorium on nuclear power and reversed it. And so that was based on the needs of the state, and they were looking at future demand, and that was the decision made for them. So a moratorium isn't totally permanent; it can be changed.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for all that basic kind of understanding. Wanted to talk about something a little bit more, kind of a larger concern that I think everyone has and carries with them when they think about nuclear. In particular, it's the safety, the concerns about the environment, but also waste management, radioactivity. There's, I think the average person, when they think nuclear, they think of some of those images of meltdown, and also I think tend to associate nuclear explosions with, from wartime similar with nuclear power. And so can you kind of address nuclear power safety record and the concerns associated with health and waste and kind of that perception that's out there? Why don't we start with you, Madison?
Yeah, so I think that that there is a significant informational gap between the perceptions about nuclear power and its realities. I think that these are driven largely by kind of two larger factors. One is that access to information and the perseverance of misinformation, which we as an organization and many others try to combat with incorporating nuclear science into educational curricula, doing community events, webinars, and kind of having those conversations about the actual safety record of nuclear power, and that is very safe. But the second one that I think is a little bit trickier to address here in kind of talking about the safety record or the benefits of nuclear, the realities of nuclear, and that's trust. Trust in institutions, trust in government, trust that the information that's being given to you as a consumer is accurate and true, and that's harder to address. And I think any approach that goes beyond just providing better education or information about the safety record of nuclear needs to be done with humility, honesty, transparency, an intersectional approach, especially when we talk about environmental justice issues. So though we can sit up here and tell you all day long about how safe nuclear is, if you don't have access to that information yourself, or you don't have that trust in the institutions giving it to you, it's kind of worthless. So I think that if we're going to improve that, that's where we need to start.
Is there a generational divide in the perception? I mean, just observing, I get that sense. But.
Yeah, so I hate to sound like a political spokesperson up here, but public opinion polling is showing us consistently that the support for nuclear is growing, and there is a generational divide in that approval. Younger people are more receptive and supportive of nuclear power. There are several reasons for why this may be. One is that they don't have that historical legacy of anti-nuclear sentiment. A lot of younger people weren't around for some of the disasters that have happened. And climate anxiety is another driver for why younger people are more open to the technology, seeing as though it is carbon-free. So there are some reasons why there's a generational divide, but I think we can point to a couple obvious ones.
Marcus, can we talk a little bit about the waste streams, challenges associated with that? And Jack, if you wanted to jump in on that also.
Yeah, happy to. So, yeah, waste is also top of mind for people when it comes to nuclear energy. We actually call it used fuel, and I'll get to why we call it used fuel. But I want to start with the big picture in mind, because every technology has a waste stream, and every technology has to do the same three things to be able to address it. The first is they have to be able to manage it safely. The nuclear industry is managing it safely now. We've demonstrated that through years of management. The nice thing about used fuel is that it's a solid. In fact, if you looked at used fuel and new fuel next to each other, visually they're identical. The difference is used fuel has some radioactivity in it. But because it's a solid, it's very easy to protect the public through steel and concrete. We have an independent nuclear regulator that has confirmed that it can be stored safely that way for hundreds of years or even longer. And the other nice thing is that it's very small. And so because it's small and compact, it's much easier to store safely as well. And it can be transported safely. We do that every year. The second thing that technologies have to do is they have to be able to pay for it. One of the unique things about the nuclear industry is that from the beginning of operations, we set aside money to be able to pay for the used fuel management at the end of life. And so there's no question about whether the money's going to be there. We're saving for it from the very beginning. In fact, today there's over $40 billion saved up for the permanent disposal of used fuel. And that leads to the third thing, which is you have to have a place to put it permanently. And in the United States, we have a law that has decided Yucca Mountain would be that location. And it's been studied to verify technically it would be a safe place to store it. It's not the only place. Many places could qualify. Now, there is a political discussion going on in Congress whether we should stick with Yucca Mountain or whether we should go back and do a consent-based siting process. And I should say, from Yucca Mountain perspective, the local community is supportive, even though state leaders are not. So now, whichever side you fall on that debate, whether we should stick with Yucca Mountain or go find a more voluntary community, I think the important thing is that in the end, it's worth taking a few extra years to get this right. There's no safety issue drawing us forward. And we know that we can eventually get there. Other countries have found sites and are moving forward. And we talked about Canada just a little while ago. And the last thing to keep in mind is that the reason I called it used fuel and not waste is because we only use 5% of the energy in that fuel. There's 95% of the energy left to be extracted from that. We'd have to recycle it. Today it's not economical, but someday it will be. And we'll be glad that that's a resource for the future. The last thing I'll bring close to Hawaii is it does not need to stay permanently or for long durations at the place that it was generated. There are options to be able to move it out of Hawaii so that it wouldn't be a long-term legacy here.
Okay, yeah, that was one of the questions that I had is, seems like the general notion is that right now, because Yucca Mountain isn't online yet, right, that you can't store anywhere, so you have to store it on site. But and that's a concern, obviously, for anybody who's hosting a nuclear.
That's right, and that's the case today for the large reactors. Is that it's staying on site, until we find a place for it. There are efforts going on to find a centralized storage place so it can move off site. But what's unique about a class of reactors called microreactors, these would be 1 to 50 megawatt in electric that would replace diesel generators and other things. The companies developing those are coming up with business models that would take the used fuel back soon after operations. It has to have a cooling period before you can transport it. But soon after operations, they would take that back to a central location, which would not be in Hawaii.
Thank you. I think also, sticking with waste briefly, the concern is the long-livedness of it, the long life of the waste, and, having to ensure that it's maintained in a protected state for so long, whereas other technologies don't have that concern per se. Jack, is there something you can address to that?
Yeah, I think There's a couple of ways to talk about any technology, nuclear being obviously the subject here, and one way to talk about it is in a standalone kind of a way, and the other way to talk about it is in comparison to other options, right? So when it comes to waste, I think that it is both the most, it is one of the issues that raises the most concern amongst the public, and it is also, in my opinion, the very best aspect of nuclear power. And I say that because we can even have this conversation about managing the waste because it can be managed. Unlike many of our existing technologies and what we've been using for the last century in terms of fossil fuels, or even potentially some renewable fuels, where the waste is not managed at all. It may be mitigated or reduced, but it's essentially discharged to this huge environment, and it is uncontrolled. Whereas with nuclear, the waste is completely controlled. It doesn't go out into the environment. It's as you said, it's a solid. It's managed. You can, put it in a container, and you can go stand next to that container, and that's your waste. I think we've talked about a couple of examples to put it into people's perspective. Two examples I think are really kind of eye-opening. And so if you take all of the nuclear waste that's been generated, I should say, I apologize, used nuclear fuel, that's been generated in the United States as a leader in nuclear energy production for the last 50, 60 years, and you put it all in one place, it would fit on a football field stacked about 10 yards high. Compare that to comparable technologies, even renewable technologies today in terms of waste, in terms of use solar panels or wind turbines, et cetera, and you consider that volume of waste for that amount of energy generated, it's minuscule. The other visual that we were talking about before coming out was that if I were to take the entire amount of my energy profile for my entire life and put it in a container of used nuclear fuel, it would fit in a soda can. And the fact that I could put it in a soda can, contain that and manage it, is, I think, the very best thing to talk about nuclear power.
Just don't drink that soda. Just kidding.
Yeah, well, I don't drink. I think the sugar might be more harmful to me than the nuclear waste.
Touche. Okay, so waste is one safety concern. The other one is emergency disaster. Anywhere is disaster prone. Hawaii has a unique set of concerns. Living in a community where a reactor would be located is concerning from a safety perspective. You think back to Fukushima is probably the most recent concern, and I think there's some legitimate questions around safety and disasters. Some honest, concerns about what that would mean for a place like Hawaii. If there was a meltdown in a place like Hawaii with population densities being what they are, what do you have to say to those concerns that people share about safety risk with nuclear power plants?
Yeah, I'll start out. So I think Madison did a great job talking about the safety. I want to add a few things, because understanding the safety of the current reactors and then moving into the safety of the advanced reactors is really helpful. So for the current large reactors that are in operation today, it's actually one of the safest industries in the entire world. And if you look at it from the potential accidents, OSHA reportable events, it's equivalent to working at your risk as a worker is equivalent to working at a data call center. That's how safe nuclear power operations are. And safety is built on three fundamental pillars. One is that they're designed to withstand and protect against the worst case, whether it's a worst case internal accident, failure of a system, or whether it's a worst case external event, which could be an earthquake or something similar. The second is that we have a strong and independent regulator, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And then the third is that we strive for operational excellence, because operational performance results in safety performance. So those are the underpinnings of our current safety record. Then on top of that, advanced technologies, and you might hear them called advanced reactors, small modular reactors, you might hear them called Gen 4 microreactors. It's all talking about advanced nuclear technologies that are ingraining additional safety and security measures into the designs. And so there's a lot of different ways to do that. Primarily what they're looking at is utilizing more natural forces. So where the larger reactors use active engineered components, which we know that anything people do tends to have a failure opportunity in there. But when you rely on nature, natural processes, gravity, natural circulation, those always work. Nature always works. So you have a much better performance of safety when we do that. Now, we find out that as we incorporate those things, we can actually recognize some economic benefits to the plants as well in terms of simplifying systems. But it's that enhanced safety that's really important. Now, it's good to put it into context. What does that enhanced safety really mean from a practical standpoint? So there's two ways to look at it that I think are helpful. One is for today's reactors, you have to have two independent off-site power supplies for that nuclear reactor for safety reasons. So if you lose your off-site power, you need to shut down because you need that power to maintain those active human-built safety systems that I talked about. And so this is, related to what happened in Fukushima accident. They lost their off-site power. So these advanced technologies don't have that because they're relying on natural processes. Their safety systems work whether you have that power or not. So there's no more requirement for off-site power for those plants. The second is in the emergency planning zone, because the emergency planning zone is there to help protect people in case of a worst case event. And so today's nuclear power plants have a 10-mile zone, and that 10-mile zone is determined by the amount of radiation the public would receive within that 10 miles would be of an elevated nature that it could have impacts. It's not to say that people would die from that radiation, but it could increase your chances for long-term cancer. That's basically the metric of it. And it would exceed 1 rem, and 1 rem is a very small amount. It's basically about what we receive in a year, or it's the equivalent of a full-body CT scan. So these advanced technologies, because they have the enhanced safety profile, they're able to shrink that emergency planning zone down to the site boundary, which could be 100 or a few hundred meters in length. So we're talking about very small distances compared to 10 miles, very small areas for which the radiation could get to those elevated areas to have an increased risk in cancer if the worst case event happened. And so what the doses at that fence line would be are way below what would be of any statistical probability for having any health impacts, and certainly no immediate health impacts from that. So,
and in addition to natural disasters, I think about the Ukraine war and how the nuclear power plants were being targeted or discussed about being targeted. In those situations, these safety zones that you're talking about, are those, is there a way that, the design can kind of guarantee also safety under those circumstances where they're actively being attacked?
Yeah, so I talked about safety. We also look at security as well. And so we're required to protect against security threats. There are domestic terrorist profiles and characteristics that we have to protect against. And I can't give the details of those. Those are security information, but I can say that they are very sophisticated capabilities of a terrorist that we have to protect against. When it comes to questions like Ukraine, those come into acts of war or aggression against the United States, and those would need to be protected against by our federal government. And so there's a distinction there. There is a level at which we protect against, and then a level at which the government needs to protect against. I think when it comes to considerations like, well, what if we were at war and a country were wanting to attack our nuclear assets, I do think, not to try to be respectful in this response, I do think we have bigger problems if the United States is worried about a foreign country attacking our nuclear power plants. I think there's other things we need to worry about.
Okay. Jack, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to safety, I like to use a lot of car analogies because people, it's very ubiquitous. We all drive in cars. I would compare the safety aspects of some of the early nuclear power plant designs to these advanced passive system designs, what we call walk-away safe, right? So if everything else happens, you walk away, the plant is going to remain safe. I would compare that to like when I was a kid and sitting without a seatbelt in the back of my parents' station wagon, going on road trips to automobile safety today. It's a whole different thing with all the passive and active systems that we have in cars. And so I think that there's a generational difference between safety, and it was safe then. I mean, when we talk about safety, people bring up three things, right? And that is 3 Mile Island, and Chernobyl, and Fukushima. Those are the three nuclear incidents that people primarily talk about. And I just want to ask, so does anybody know how many people died as a result of 3 Mile Island? 0. Thank you. So, none. So was there a release? Yes. Was it dangerous in hindsight? I don't think so. I mean, there was negligible, if any, effect on that. Chernobyl was obviously a horrible disaster, and lots of people died as a result of that, both directly from radiation, and also from combating the fires and follow-on health risks associated with the radiation. So there is nobody in the nuclear industry is going to argue with you when you talk about Chernobyl being a big disaster. And then Fukushima, kind of same thing. Does anybody know how many people died as a result of the reactor plant issues at Fukushima? Again, 0. I think that there was one person who died. It was a firefighter. But as a result of the radiation, there were no deaths. There was an evacuation. And yeah, did you have some?
Yeah, I was going to say that most of the harm that was caused to people at the Fukushima disaster was due to evacuation, and the deaths related to evacuations from the tsunami and the crisis of communication around the nuclear power reactor. So, but as a result of the reactor,
yeah.
None.
So those are some important things. I mean, it's kind of like okay, but I think so. It's important when you talk about safety what the real risks are, and as an industry, the nuclear power industry has the safest record of any of the technologies out there: wind, solar, thermal, fossil fuel. I mean, I think it's and if you take out the Chernobyl affects the numbers, it is like by far it's safer than wind, for example.
That part's been the most surprising thing to me in talking was that stat. But when you think about, I guess, folks falling off of roofs or associated with the wind tower construction, there are some deaths associated with that. So
yeah, and I don't want that to say that there aren't. I mean, there are problems, right? So I'm not trying to to gloss over things. I think that there's ongoing hazards at both Chernobyl and Fukushima that require some mitigation cleanup. So I'm not trying to say there wasn't, but in terms of like hard numbers, it's clear.
Well, thank you. And thanks for wading into that one. That's clearly one of the main issues, I think, that's top of mind for everybody. Let's change topics a little bit. We've got about 15 minutes, so we're going to have to move quickly through a couple remaining topics if we want to get to Q&A, which hopefully you have opportunity to put it on the app. Let's briefly talk about the state of the new technology in nuclear, specifically kind of SMR and its potential fit for our island-type community.
Yeah, and so I talked about the various terminologies. There's two ways to look at the advanced reactor technologies. One is in terms of the size of reactors. We have large reactors, that's 1,000 megawatts. I don't think any of those would ever make sense for Hawaii's grid size. We have small modular reactors that are less than 300 megawatts, and some are even down in the 70 to 80 megawatt range, which could make sense, maybe on Oahu or something like that. But then we have microreactors, which are between 1 and 50 megawatts in size, and those might make more sense for Hawaii because they're specifically being designed for more remote uses and smaller grid applications. And so I know Alaska was one of the places that was most interested in microreactors for remote villages, other remote operations, Department of Defense facilities as well. And so those could be a good fit. The size of a microreactor is pretty small. It'll fit on the back of a regular semi truck. So I'm trying to visualize sizes. It might be the size of a minivan or something like that. The size of the building that it would go in, also quite small, would take certainly less than an acre. It might be the size of a house would be the building, and then the actual plant layout, which would have some boundary areas, the site area, so you have some extra space on the site, would be a few acres at most for a microreactor. So very small amount of land that it would not require local bodies of water to for ultimate heat sinks. It would use the air as a heat sink. And so it's good environmentally that way as well. To put it in comparison, because we're talking about something that could be up to 50 megawatts in size of capacity, and we know from a land usage perspective, I forget the exact number, but if you wanted to use renewables, you need at least a factor of 100 more of the land area to get the same amount of energy out of. So it's very efficient from a land use perspective. The second way to look at the advanced reactor technologies is in the type of material that's used to cool it. So we do have water that can cool it. We have gas like helium that can cool it. We have liquid metal like sodium or lead that can cool it. And we have molten salt, which is essentially like table salt, but at very high temperatures it becomes a liquid to cool the technology. And they all are utilizing more advanced forms of fuel. All of these help to contribute to the safety performance that I talked about earlier. The final thing about the advanced reactor technologies is that they're being developed for more flexibility in operations because we know that firm clean is important, but we know that flexibility in operations from a dispatchability standpoint is really important. So yes, they can vary in power output to match the demands from the grid, but they could also change the energy product that they're delivering, whether it would switch from electricity to heat because they produce heat organically, and it's the heat that's converted to electricity. So that heat could be used for industrial processes, it could be used for water purification, ammonia generation, all of these other things, or it could be used to create hydrogen and if there's a hydrogen economy there as well. So there's a lot of flexibility and adaptability that's being developed.
You had mentioned something about land use, and I thought that was pretty interesting. In particular, we've heard all conference about the constraints for land here on our islands. different uses, you know, agriculture, energy, housing, and I would also add in conservation as all priorities here. Madison, in particular, when it comes to land use, you know, what are some of the benefits, I guess, with nuclear as compared to, you know, some of the other kind of technologies we're talking about?
Yeah, so obviously land use is one of them. It's I think you were mentioning it's like 100 magnitudes less than comparable renewables, but it's also it's not only the least amount of land use, it's least amount. It has the highest capacity factor, largely over 90%. I'm unsure whether SMRs will still have that capacity factor. It might take a little bit more time. This means that it's just running at 100% for a certain percentage of time, has the highest capacity factor of any other energy source. It requires the least amount of raw materials per energy source. And then I can also jump into jobs if you want me to jump into jobs. So the nuclear industry has the highest median salary, on average 50% higher than any other energy sector job. It's also some of the highest in its unionization rates. It contributes millions and millions of dollars towards tax bases and creates jobs within the communities that nuclear is cited. And you know, when people think about nuclear jobs or people who work at nuclear plants, we're considered, you know, these are people with PhDs or nuclear engineering degrees, but that's not the case. Nuclear jobs are, you know, oftentimes, you know, for people who might just have a high school degree or, you know, have gone through an apprenticeship program, and they still receive these benefits. And, you know, nuclear facilities can run for a really long time. If you Google it, it says 40 years, but licenses are given out to facilities of around 60 years as well. So.
Thank you. And I guess with that, you know, the community, obviously there's kind of growing popularity of nuclear nationally. I don't think we have the same sentiment per se here, but you know, you start to hear a little bit more and more. So, you know, how would you effectively kind of engage with community as it relates to energy, you know, our energy needs, but in particular nuclear in a place like Hawaii?
Yeah, I don't know about you, but oftentimes when I'm talked at, I don't listen. And so it's meeting people where they're at and acknowledging the historical, cultural, and preconceived notions about the power source and listening to people and their concerns, not brushing them aside and throwing numbers at them. And so once you learn where people are coming from, you can communicate effectively. But as it stands, very generally and very fundamentally, some of the opening remarks yesterday hit home and I think should be how we approach nuclear power and the public opinion towards nuclear power is that it requires community engagement and community consent. And the only way that nuclear power will become successful and really accomplish many of the demand and the needs that communities need is if their communities are on board. And so that starts with meeting people where they're at, asking questions, knowing the historical, cultural context of nuclear power, or just nuclear in general, and having those conversations honestly and transparently.
And just to add to that, because you talked about the community benefits, and especially in terms of tax base and local economy, nuclear energy is is a technology that has some of the most localized benefits. So a lot of other technologies, the benefits end up going outside of the community, where nuclear, a lot of the benefits stay within the community. The other thing is that, 2 other points. One is in terms of the local community, we know that there is broad support generally for nuclear power, but we also know that closest to the nuclear power plants has the highest levels of support for nuclear energy, and that's one because they know more. You know, having a nuclear power plant, you just you seek out and learn more information. But it also is representative of how nuclear power is a good neighbor. And then the last point I wanted to talk about, coming back to jobs. In addition, we also are a huge employer of people coming out of military services, especially the Navy is a huge source of recruitment for our workforce.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks for all that. Wanted to move to Q&A. Unsurprisingly, we had a lot of questions and some comments in the form of questions. one that I don't think we talked about too much. Let's discuss LCOE of nuclear versus other energy tech. Why not touch the cost aspect? So levelized cost of energy, why don't we discuss that?
Yeah, I'd love to take this on because we've done a lot of work on cost of nuclear. So levelized cost of electricity, I'm talking to an expert audience, so I'm not going to explain it. But the important thing to know is that when you're comparing LCOE of different technologies, you're not comparing, well, you are comparing apples and oranges, right? They don't have the same characteristics, the same benefits. Not all are firm clean. And so the studies that have looked at, well, what is the LCOE of firm clean comparisons show that nuclear is on par or cheaper than other technologies that have become firmed up and are also clean. The more important point, though, is that LCOE generally is not the best way to make a decision on which technology I should deploy next. Or, you know, should I put all of my eggs in this one basket because they have the lowest LCOE? What we know is that the cost that the ratepayers see is based on the total system cost. And the system is a complex system. And so what we do know is a couple of principles. One is the lowest cost systems have a diverse set of generation sources. And the second, studies have shown, is that diverse set of generations that include nuclear are generally the lowest. So we know that nuclear, even if it looks not as good on an LCOE, you might suggest something else, that there is a role for nuclear to play in systems to help make it affordable, clean, and reliable.
Can I just add 2 comments to that? You know, reflecting back on yesterday's comments, Chair Asuncion mentioned that, you know, 2045 is not the end goal, and we need to be able to sustain our goals from 2045 on, right? And you know, it was mentioned that these nuclear power plants are generally designed for a certain life, but there are power plants that have been extended out to 80 years of life. So being able to sustain that success, if nuclear power were determined to be a solution for the problem set that we have, it would be a longer term solution than the other technologies that are being considered. And then subsequently, you know, in the developer discussion yesterday, there was pointed out the advantage of solar power is that you're locking in an energy price for approximately 20 years. Well, you know, with nuclear power, you're essentially kind of locking in that energy price even longer. So I just wanted to point those out.
The other thing I'll mention, NEI has a report out there, it's in the public, on microreactor costs. And so we looked at microreactor costs, and the range is between 7 cents and 40 cents. That sounds like a big range, but it covers first of a kind versus nth of a kind. It covers high cost estimates versus high learning rates and that sort of thing. So that's the general LCOE that we're looking for at nuclear.
Thank you. We have an interesting one here. So panel's only speaking to direct radiation impact to a person. We do have a robust fishing industry significant to our food supply. There are other environmental impacts that are being ignored given our small island ecosystem. I am sure this is what the conversation sounded like when building Red Hill fuel storage over an aquifer. Again, obviously concerns. Do you have anything to say about kind of that secondary effects on food infrastructure?
Yeah, so the NRC requirements and the design of safety take into account not just direct radiation, but also radiation impacts into the environment. And so it will look at whether there's a potential for getting into the groundwater. The NRC has strict limits on protecting against that. And the record shows that nuclear has been able to protect the local water as well, the groundwater and other things.
And, you know, site specifically, any reactor or any project that is looking for licensure under the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has a public comment process in terms of its environmental impact statements. This is prior and post to environmental impact statements and research that's being done. And so say it is the case that Hawaii is looking at siting a nuclear reactor, that process for what should be researched is, you know, robust in and of itself. But if there are specifics, they take public comment as well for very site-specific considerations.
Yeah, I think that there's been a lot of discussion about the effects of Fukushima in particular, that there was some release of into the ocean, and that the ocean currents would, disperse that, and the effect on fish and the environment and people. I would encourage people to do, look into the real numbers associated with that and see what those results were. And I think you'll find that they are, if measurable at all, then they're completely negligible compared with the natural dosage that we, get any day of the week. And there's some discussion about, they can detect the radiation from Fukushima, like on the west coast of the United States. It's not that they can detect an increase in that, it's that the specific isotopes can be isolated because of the nature of it. It's not that there's a major increase in, or a detectable increase in radioactivity levels in the water.
And we'll be around as well after this. If you have questions about, say, tritium, which is the release from Fukushima, if you have questions, we'll be around to answer them.
Maybe just one more question. Can you address the relative safety of waste disposal transport in particular? I know we had talked about being able to potentially ship the waste, used fuel off island. We already need to consider the requirements for waste transport and recovery for solar PV, lithium-ion batteries, and the consequences of doing that. Importantly, how does this compare to those same requirements and consequences, in particular for nuclear?
Yeah, so the used fuel is being transported every year, and it's being done safely. And the reason you've never heard of it is because it's being done so safely, and we don't have any incidents related to it. The same strategies to protect used fuel in storage are similar for transportation. So concrete, well, it wouldn't be concrete, but it would be steel. The NRC sets the range of tests that have to be performed on those packages, which include fire tests, submersion test, height drop test, puncture tests. And they're set to be very extreme in order to cover all the range of potential extreme incidents it might find in transportation. And so those packages have to pass that. And it's worldwide. So used fuel is transported on land. It is transported by sea. In fact, it is even transported sometimes by air. Not very often. That's in extreme situations, but it is done safely and can be.
All right. You want to have the last word, Madison?
There's some great videos online of these cask tests if you're interested. They're very interesting.
Well, thank you. I learned a lot in working with you folks, and I think, it's really great just in general to have a better understanding of all the technologies that we're thinking about or maybe not even considering, but as we move forward, we're going to have to be looking at trade-offs and, put it in there with the rest of the technologies, geothermal and wind and solar and everything else. And, the better informed we are collectively, I think the better we can make these kind of decisions going forward. So please join me in thanking the panel today. Mahalo.